What the hell is this, Decker?
10 insanely enchanting Clive Barker monstrous villains, explained. Origins and backstories. The amazing horror masterpieces by writer and filmmaker Clive Barker are known to people worldwide. Even before his directorial debut via Hellraiser in 1987, he touched many lives by his novels that opened doors for immersive characters from distinct hellish worlds. He has unique, imaginative, dark, experimental methods of storytelling, which many writers tried but couldn't replicate. This video brings you 10 such enchanting and multi-dimensional horror villains created by the maestro of horror, Clive Barker. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Pinhead is the lead villain in Clive Barker's Hellraiser, directed in 1987 based on the novella The Hellbound Heart. He is also the most famous character Barker has unleashed within the Hellraiser franchise. Surprisingly, he wasn't always the tyrannical immortal priest of hell. His origin story before becoming a Cenobite is extremely normal and surprisingly humane. Despite having a relatively minor role in the first film, Doug Bradley's Pinhead role showcased a horrifying yet mesmerizing villain. After the massive success of the original Hellraiser film, Pinhead became the poster boy for the franchise. Pinhead is the only Cenobite that appeared in every Hellraiser movie. Before becoming the eloquent demon that strictly abides by Hell's rules, Pinhead was a regular human being named Elliot Spencer. Spencer was a captain in the British Army who lost all faith in humanity and God due to his horrendous experiences during the First World War. He also succumbed to a strong case of survivor's guilt since he outlived several of his friends and comrades, and he encountered the Lament configuration, which ultimately was responsible for him transforming into a Cenobite. Spencer solved the Lament configuration in the early 1920s, after which he received both the pleasure and pain that he was seeking. Due to his recovered memories, Pinhead split into two entities, his old self Spencer and his evil version Pinhead. Pinhead in his current version has no constraints when it comes to his former humanity. Eventually, the two entities merged and became one Pinhead, the priest of hell. Candyman is a hook-handed slasher and one of Clive Barker's most terrifying villains. He holds a fascinating origin story that might make viewers sympathize with his tragedy. The first Candyman film was released in 1992 based on Clive Barker's short story, The Forbidden. Candyman's human narrative slightly differs between the first Candyman and its sequel. Before becoming the Candyman, Daniel Robitaille was a former slave son. He was elevated to high levels within society towards the end of the Civil War by creating a machine that could mass-produce shoes. He was also a gifted painter and grew up mostly being accepted by the elite. He attended Ivy League schools and was associated with rich white people. However, things took a turn when a rich white man hired him to paint his daughter Caroline's portrait. Daniel and Caroline fell in love, which led to her getting pregnant, making Caroline's father not so happy. He gathered a lynch mob, attacking and killing him in a terrible, gruesome way. They sawed off his right hand, which led him to putting a hook in its place. They then covered him in honey, because of which a swarm of bees attacked him. He died in agonizing pain, and the mob yelled Candyman as they watched. Daniel then went on to become an urban legend, after which he became a real, supernatural boogeyman. Due to this horrendous story, Candyman is considered to be one of the most sympathetic murderers created by Clive Barker. WICK. WICK is Barker's newest and most unsettling creation. He appears in Clive Barker's Next Testament comic book released in 2014. He holds himself as a god and the father of colors. WICK was trapped in an ornate pyramid structure buried in an unknown desert. Julian Edmund, a rich and eccentric man, had a dream that led him to search for this structure under the impression that it will allow him to leave an everlasting mark in the world. Once Edmund broke the structure and released WICK, WICK introduced himself as God and Father of Colors dripping in paint. His presence was almost surreal. WICK inspired Edmund and returned with him to a base camp that he found in the desert when he had the dream. After realizing that WICK is the one he was seeking for his ultimate goals, he fired all his workers. Edmund then introduced WICK to his wife Vera, who was shocked to meet him. Later, Wick murdered several people outside Vera's tent. Wick then told Edmund that he wanted to learn the ways of the world through him. While doing this, he began discovering errors and discrepancies in the Bible. Soon, Edmund took Wick along with him back to his mansion and hosted a party where Wick was the guest of honor. He met Edmund's family, including his son Tristan and Tristan's wife, Elspeth. However, in a turn of events, the party began to grow tense as the guests started getting uncomfortable due to Wick's appearance and peculiar gestures. After declaring himself God and inviting ridicule from the guests, he released his disappointment and frustration regarding humanity's current state by blowing off one of the guests' heads, leading to shock everywhere. Wick's character is a more extreme version of the God of the Old Testament, where Clive Barker drew inspiration for the character. Mahogany, the subway butcher. Mahogany, also known as the Butcher, is the primary antagonist of the short story, the Midnight Meat Train in Clive Barker's Books of Blood Volume 1. This was later made into a horror movie of the same name directed by Ryuhei Kitamura in 2008, where Vinnie Jones starred as Mahogany. He is a serial killer who mercilessly commits his murders on subway lines. He hacks open his victims' bodies and hangs them there from their feet on the handles. His killings are a method of suppressing an even larger evil that exists below the surface. Mahogany is a job post that the US government protects with the highest security. Mahogany's work dates back to 1895 and has been associated with several urban legends but never seen or found. Mahogany's job is to find healthy people and then murder them using short-range weaponry. After being murdered, their corpse is stripped of all clothing, intricately shaved, and then hung from their feet using hooks on the subway handles. In the movie, he even removed their teeth, nails, and eyeballs. He does this so that the bodies can be used as food for the monstrous creatures hiding below New York City's surface. They are too weak to hunt and can only consume human flesh. That's where Mahogany, the subway butcher, comes into the picture. In this film, Kitamura shows that these beasts plan to overthrow humankind and use them as food, so the government uses the Mahogany to conserve the peace between them and the human race. There is not much to Mahogany's character in terms of personality traits in the film. The one in the book, however, enjoys the brutality and is proud of his job. He is a psycho who mocks his victims when they are alive. Dr. CHANNARD. Dr. Philip CHANNARD is the primary antagonist in the movie Hellbound: Hellraiser 2. He is a psychiatrist obsessed with the occult, which ultimately leads him to transforming into a Cenobite. Dr. CHANNARD ran an institute named after him, and one of his patients, a teenager named Kirsty Cotton, told him about Cenobites. CHANNARD had the mattress where Kirsty's stepmother Julia Cotton died. His assistant, Kyle McRae, saw him taking patients to sacrifice them so that he could bring Julia back to life. CHANNARD kept feeding Julia's corpse as she neared resurrection. Kyle took Kirsty to the house where they both saw Julia and CHANNARD with Tiffany, one of his mute patients. Although they thought Tiffany was another sacrifice to resurrect Julia, in reality, she was the one who opened the laminate configuration, sending CHANNARD to hell. Julia, who was working for Leviathan, betrayed CHANNARD, which led to Leviathan turning him into a Cenobite. After becoming a Cenobite, CHANNARD continued hounding Kirsty and Tiffany. Soon, it is discovered that hell and earth are beginning to collide because CHANNARD gave his patients personalized laminate configurations. Tiffany sets out to close the puzzle box in an attempt to stop CHANNARD, which finally leads to Leviathan severing ties with him and tearing his head off. CHANNARD in his Cenobite form is held by a hideous phallic tentacle gripping the top of his head and a terrifying demon-like face that scares the wits out of everyone. Rawhead Rex. Rawhead Rex is a character created by Clive Barker based on a short story from the third volume of his Books of Blood series. This was also made into a film in 1986. Rex was a primeval carnivorous creature with a thirst for blood that can make vampires look insignificant. He's a beast that embodies the sex drive of men, terrorizing Zeal, a small town in England. Ironically, his only fears are pregnant women or women who are on their period. Though Rawhead Rex was defeated and buried by the townsfolk eventually, he was accidentally set free after centuries by a farmer who was immediately murdered after being released. In an attempt to recharge his power to what it once was, he set out on a murder spree, attacking people all over town, including a police officer, and castrating him with his claws. Later he arrived at the local church where he managed to corrupt the verger. He did that by pissing on him. He then continued his killing spree, which included a little child. Rawhead's fear of pregnant women ultimately led to his downfall, as the protagonist used an idol symbolizing pregnancy to weaken him, which eventually overwhelmed him. After this, he was beaten to death with the same idol. Moreover, his appearance in all three adaptations, the short story, graphic novel, and film, are extremely different. Clive Barker drew inspiration for this character from European folklore and mythology. Rawhead Rex is a sadistic, brutal beast with fur and hair all over him in the short story. He lurks in the woods and murders people. He is 9 feet tall and resembles a walking phallus. In the comic, he is a lanky blue figure. In all three adaptations, he symbolizes masculine aggression.
Together. You're crazy. No, I'm deaf. Plain and simple. Say it!
Dr. Decker. Philip K. Decker, also known as Dr. Decker, is the primary villain from Clive Barker's horror dark fantasy novel Cabal. He is more popularly known as Buttonface. He is also the main villain in Barker's movie Nightbreed. He is a well-renowned psychiatrist who wants to help cure his patient Aaron Boone of his recurring nightmares about Midian. However, what people are unaware of is that Decker is actually a sadistic serial killer who likes slaughtering entire families. He wanted to frame Boone for his murders to continue his life's primary mission to end all other lives. Decker's adaptation in the movie is slightly different from Barker's original work. In Nightbreed, Decker, played by David Cronenberg, gets obsessed with Midian to the extent that he does terrible things to establish its location. In the book, he doesn't bother about Midian. His only intention is to frame Aaron Boone for his murders. Decker's book version is extremely mentally unstable and driven by his psychotic tendencies to the point where he unleashes a second personality on his mask, Buttonface, who orders him to perform massacres. In the film, he is entirely conscious of what he is doing without being controlled by other personalities. This makes him more dangerous than his book version because his obsession turns him against every Nightbreed creature who lives in Midian. Dr. Decker is the only regular human being villain that Clive Barker has created amongst all the insane supernatural creatures unleashed. Mr. Hood. Point 3. Mr. Hood is one of Clive Barker's creepiest but coolest villains. He appears in his first children's book titled The Thief of Always. In his story, the protagonist, Harvey Swick, is taken to a magical holiday house created by Mr. Hood, a mysterious warden. Although the holiday house is fun and magical, it has more than one peculiar feature. Christmas at the holiday house comes once every day, and one day spent at the holiday house is equivalent to an entire year passing by in the real world. Mr. Hood terrorizes people at the holiday house with his monstrous lieutenants and also steals their souls, turning them into dead-eyed fish. They are then thrown into the forbidden lake in the backyard. Mr. Hood is the rendition of a classic boogeyman. He exists outside one's main view for most of the story. When he finally reveals himself, he is made of fear. During the final confrontation between Harvey and Mr. Hood, we see Mr. Hood creating a frightening body for himself from the house's remains. Although Hood isn't Barker's bloodiest monster, he is definitely the most primal.
You still feel something for that bitch?
Yes.
Nyx appears in Clive Barker's 1995 horror fantasy film Lord of Illusions, loosely based on the short story The Last Illusion from his Books of Blood Volume 6. He is the primary antagonist here and the leader of the black magic cult. Nyx led the cult in the Mojave Desert inside a house, the cult's headquarters. He didn't just rely on illusions, but can also perform real magic. He tells his followers that he has been named the Puritan while preaching. He tells everyone that cleansing the world is their destiny. Butterfield, one of his young followers, informed Nyx one day that Swan has arrived. Swan is a man who used to be a part of Nyx's cult with many others, and has now come to stop him from killing a little girl that he kidnapped. After undergoing a series of non-violent confrontations, Butterfield escapes, leaving Swan to be attacked by Nyx. Nyx used his magic to enter Swan's mind and showed him a vision of flesh with a god's eye. This altered his perception forever and made him view his friends and allies as scary, monstrous figures. This manipulation ability makes him one of Clive Barker's most dangerous villains. Although Nix was eventually shot in the back and killed, he returned after being buried for 13 years. Butterfield located Swan and everyone else responsible and dug Nix's body out of his grave. He was then taken back to the Mojave Desert, where all the members of the cult resurrected him. Nix was played by Daniel von Bargen in the film. His followers mutilated themselves in a terrible way so that he could come back to life. Nix is explicitly compared to the real-life cult leader Charles Manson.
So am I. Come to Daddy.
Leroy GOMM. Leroy GOMM is one of the villains from Clive Barker's movie Nightbreed, released in 1990. Even if he has the least dialogue, his appearance and demeanor catch a lot of attention amongst the fans. He comes from a legacy of the greatest clown trope within Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries. Their patriarch decided to instill interbreeding within their family in a misguided attempt to uphold the purity of their genius comedic talent. Ultimately, over the decades, this caused the deterioration of every new generation's offspring mentally and physically. Leroy was the strangest product of this interbreeding lineage. He was one of the participants of the failed defense of Midian when genocidal sons of the free destroyed the underground city. Due to his extra appendages, he was a worthy opponent against them, after which he became one of the Nightbreed who escaped the scene with many others. He is a short, overweight man who has a pair of long tentacles that can retract from his stomach, and he likes wearing a lot of vulgar golden jewelry. He has the unique characteristics of being both extremely knowledgeable but overly filthy at the same time. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.
Allow me at least a kiss. Just one exquisite kiss.